share a great flight on board one of Air North's classic 737-500s, I had the opportunity to interview the airline's CEO and co-founder here at their headquarters located in Whitehorse, Yukon.
Okay, Joe Sparling, president of Air North Yukon's Airline.
Perfect. All right, and then that phone conversation just heard, oldest aircraft is 89, 88?
89, one of our ATRs, yeah.
ATRs, all right. I know you expanded your reach to Toronto in the past couple of years, and now you do the nonstop flight. Once your long runway reopens here in Whitehorse, are you considering getting the 737 MAX into your fleet?
Well, eventually we'll have MAXes in our fleet, yeah, but the going from the classics straight to the MAXes was created a couple of challenges. Number one, the cost. That's probably the biggest challenge. And then number two, the transition. There is no easy transition path from a classic to a MAX, but there's an easy transition from a classic to an NG and then from an NG to a MAX. So for those two reasons, it made sense for us to, have the NGs as an interim step.
Okay. You operate some of your classic aircraft, the
Yep.
400, you have the 400 and you have a couple of 500s.
4 or 500s, yeah.
Right. How do you perform the upkeep and maintenance on these classic aircraft given the, not only the weather conditions, but, the terrain and kind of the dirt and stuff that you deal with up here?
Well, the operating conditions here are actually pretty good relative to other places. We've got a relatively dry climate. We're not dealing with a lot of corrosion and all that sort of thing. The aircraft are operated under a heavy maintenance program that includes the corrosion prevention and all that sort of thing. So we maintain them in accordance with the program. That's the short answer. But they're getting more and more expensive to maintain, and that's one of the major reasons that we felt we needed to upgrade the fleet to move to the jet aircraft, or to the NG aircraft, sorry.
Okay. I know you mentioned there's that giant step from the classics to the MAX, but you're kind of doing that interim step with the 800, the NG.
Yep.
What upgrades or additions to the cockpits on these classic planes have you done that try and keep them up to the current regulation standards?
Well, we've generally avionics upgrades. That's what's available for you. So we've got full WAS capability, WAS approach capability in all of the classics, we continue to upgrade them as upgrades become available for them, so that we can operate reliably with them.
Okay. I know you said the conditions here are pretty much like everywhere else, but weather-wise or terrain-wise, what conditions and challenges do you face up here that wouldn't be found elsewhere, not only within Canada, but in North America?
Well, for the regional operation, the gravel runways and the lack of precision approaches. For the jet operation, it's, fairly straightforward. We've got an ILS here in Whitehorse, of course, the southern airports are all fully equipped. So, the best answer to your question, I guess, really deals with the regional operation, where you're dealing with airports. Northern Canada is really in need of a lot of infrastructure improvements in terms of airport capabilities, runways, and approach capabilities. So that's a challenge for us.
Okay. Has the repaving and closing of the longer runway here in Whitehorse affected your operations in terms of how much weight you can take on the planes and how many people, any weight restrictions, anything like that going out of here?
Yeah, it's imposed some relatively minor restrictions. We've been able to cope with it fairly well. We're really counting on them to do the work during the allotted time frame for it, and they were on track last year, and they seem to be on track this year. So they've done a good job of staying on the schedule. We would not want to be operating on the shortened runway during winter conditions, where you have to worry about slippery runways and stuff like that.
All right. Speaking of, I know you briefly mentioned the other regional deal with the gravel runways. Has the paving of the runway in Dawson City, I know that was relatively recent, how has that affected, or I guess improved your operations up in that city?
Well, it's resulted in a lot less wear and tear on the turboprop airplanes, and it's allowed us to operate scheduled jet service into Dawson with the classic aircraft. Prior to them paving, we could only operate the 200, gravel-equipped 200 into Dawson.
I know you already do some charters from Dawson to Alaska, and actually the plane I was on today flew in from Alaska to Dawson, and
Yep.
that's where I got on it. You used to have Alaska in your route map. Are you thinking about expanding or re-expanding back into Alaska or the northern portion of the United States, like Seattle, Washington, Portland?
Expansion is not really, or growth is not really a priority for us. You know, we would reintroduce routes that we've flown in the past, like Alaska, if we had some core customers to justify doing the flying. But I mean, there's a reason that we curtailed the Alaska service. It just wasn't paying its way.
Okay. Are there any, I know you kind of mentioned you're not looking to expand, you're looking into more of reintroducing the routes you've had in the past. Are there any airports in Canada that you used to fly to that you'd like to start flying to again?
No, I don't think there's any that we've really dropped. So I think our all of our changes to the operation, I think, you know, we like them to have a Yukon component to them. So any new routes that we've taken on over the last number of years generally are associated in some way with the Yukon. We've introduced new gateways. We don't really have any desire to spread beyond our own backyard, but you know, if there's routes, you know, additional links to the Yukon that we could provide, we would of course continue to look at those. You know, with the jet fleet upgrade, we need to fly the airplanes enough to pay for them. So
Right.
you know, but we feel that, you know, we can get all the flying we need right out of our own backyard here. So many times in the Canadian aviation industry, you know, you see a carrier starts up with 2 airplanes this year, and I'm going to have 20 airplanes next year. Our growth has been really slow and steady over 48 years, and you know, we don't have any plans for significant growth in our operation. We just want to continue to provide if we wanted to become a big airline, we couldn't be based here in Whitehorse. We'd have to base ourselves in the south, and so we've knowingly made decisions that limit our opportunities for expansion. And having said that, we feel that we can, you know, if we can maintain a strong position in this market, we can achieve all the success that we need.
Okay, perfect. I know, so this wasn't originally one of the questions I had written down, but you probably can kind of see it on the bottom in my scribblings of pen. Somebody on the plane mentioned that you give out shares of the airline when someone has ownership or part ownership of the airline. They get their stock options back in flights.
Well, one of our financing vehicles is a program called the Yukon Small Business Investment Tax Credit Program, and it's a program sponsored by the Yukon government to encourage Yukoners to make equity investments in the territory. And the program provides, or the Yukon government provides, a one-time credit equal to 25% of the investment against Yukon taxes. So when we did our first share offerings in 2001, we were authorized to do 4 share offerings in the amount of each in the amount of $800,000 pertaining to the 2001, 2, 3, and 4 tax years. We priced the shares at $5,000. The investor would get a 4% annual cash dividends and 4 one-way flight segment dividends per year. They would, on their $5,000, they would get a $1,250 credit against their Yukon taxes. And after 5 years, they could either they could convert to another class of share, or they could redeem their shares. Subsequent to that, we've done other share offerings, and we did one in early 2025 where the shares sold for $12,500. So that shows you how the value of the shares have grown. Those investors got a 25% credit against the Yukon taxes, and four one-way flight segment dividends per year. There's no more cash dividends. So the value of the shares has significantly increased over time, and the interest in them has significantly increased, and they've been a valuable tool for us to buy our first jet aircraft in 2001 and to acquire our NG aircraft now in our community of 44,000 or so people in the territory. We've raised more than $24 million, which I think is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, that is remarkable. Like I said, it wasn't in my original typed questions, but
Yeah.
somebody on the way here mentioned that,
Yeah.
and I just thought that would be a good question to throw in.
We've never really advertised to sell any shares. We always seem to have a wait list, and they've proven to be very popular. And in terms of, when we first got into the jet business, we had to have a risk mitigation strategy, and looking for government guarantees of purchases and all kinds of different things. But at the end of the day, what has supported us for the 20 some odd years that we've been in the jet business is local market support. And when we were selling the first shares over and over again, I heard from people that expressed, well, we think that the service should be provided from within the Yukon. We've been, the sentiment was at that time we've been paying too much for air travel, and it's such a valuable part of our lives up here. We think it should be provided locally, and that's really that's been our risk mitigation. It's what's kept us in the market, allowed us to be competitive with airlines that are much, much larger than ourselves. And I think we go out of our way to earn support in the local market, and it comes back to us in spades, quite frankly.
Okay. So all of the shares or the market is from right here at your headquarters, or that's where it's kind of given out or bought from?
Investors have to be Yukon residents in order to take advantage of the tax credit, and in order to actually buy a share, you need to be a Yukon resident.
What does Air North do to kind of reach the youth in aviation? I know you said the local community is a big part of Air North and its history. What are you kind of doing to promote and reach those youth to get them kind of into the industry and into aviation?
Well, what we need to do is we need to work more closely with the local educational institutions, because before we started our jet service, the career opportunities in the Yukon were, generally in construction and mining and tourism and stuff like that. And one of the things that we've done by making the Yukon the hub of our transportation network is we've introduced high-skilled aviation jobs to the territory that simply didn't exist before. And we need to do a better job, quite frankly, of working with the educational institutions so that Yukon kids know that these careers are available to them. You can be a pilot or an aircraft maintenance engineer, you can be a flight dispatcher. There's all kinds of skilled jobs here that didn't exist before we started our jet service.
Okay, and you kind of answered my next question, which was, what's the airline's goals for inspiring young aviators? You kind of said working more with the institutions and the schools here in the Yukon.
Yeah, and also developing an internal program where we can provide employment to the children of our employees. And
Right.
We already have a number of them working for us here, starting off in entry-level jobs, and hopefully they'll be inspired to increase their qualifications and take on more skilled jobs. I mean, after all, they're going to be the leadership of the future for the company.
How do you incorporate the spirit and the values of the Yukon? I know the Yukon is a big part of who you are, and you wouldn't be where you are as a company without support of locals here in the Yukon. What are you doing to incorporate the spirit and the values of the Yukoners into the airline?
Well, I think our perhaps through our product, a couple of interesting observations. One of the, if you pay attention in the departure lounge for one of our flights, or any departure lounge, you see people on their personal devices and their heads are down.
Mm-hmm.
In our departure lounge, you will often find people actually talking to one another, because it's a small community and they know one another. As you board the flight, you will have at least a few instances of passengers and flight attendants recognizing one another by name, because you know, if I mean, our probably the one job that has the most one-on-one time with customers are the flight attendants, and you know, we remind them that you'll be hard-pressed to go to the grocery store without running into somebody that will recognize you as an Air North flight attendant. That cuts both ways. You gotta gotta monitor your behavior at all times in a small town. But you know, I think the personalized interaction between our employees and our customers is something that pretty hard for anybody else to duplicate, and it gives us a bit of a competitive edge in the market. The other thing that we learned early on in the game, we got into the jet business, you know, we named the company. I'm not very imaginative, so when we started the company in 1977, the logical name was Air North. Well, that's not really a very imaginative name, and we got into the jet business, we soon learned that everybody's north of somebody. So it didn't really make a lot of sense, and we were always getting confused with Canadian North, with, well, at the time, in the early days, we were confused with Northward Airlines, Nordair. We figured out that we got to advertise the region ahead of advertising the airline. So the quickest and easiest way to do that was to become Air North Yukon's airline. And I kind of got that idea from Varig in Brazil, that described themselves as Varig, the airline of Brazil. And I thought, well, there's an easy way to keep our name, add a trailer to it, and you know, in terms of painting the airplanes and all that sort of thing, it made the process pretty simple because cost was an issue. And if you look at the airplanes, you'll see you know, right now, I guess Air North is catching up with Yukon, but Yukon probably gets as much real estate as Air North does on the airplane, so people can recognize the region and then, you know, then recognize the airline.
I know you mentioned you're not very creative, and you kind of just came up with the name Air North because we're in the Yukon. Where did you come up with or where did, you know, the paint job and the livery come out of with that orange color? Where did that come from?
Well, historically, the color scheme of the airline became the color scheme of the newest and nicest paint job that we had, and we painted all the other airplanes to match. And we often had airplanes that were painted all different colors. For quite a number of years, we had the green and yellow, the DC-3 behind you there, and that particular airplane was painted with a roller and a brush in one of the hangars. And the reason we picked that livery was because of a beaver that you see in that picture there that we acquired with a brand spanking new paint job. So we then painted the rest of the fleet to those same colors. I was against the orange color when it came time to rebrand, and I wanted to have blue and white livery, but the marketing department, Deborah principally, did mock-ups in the boardroom of, you know, different liveries, and I figured out, you know, right away that the orange really stands out, and you know, we've had people remark to us shortly after we painted the airplanes, when did you start flying to Vancouver? Well, we've been flying there for 5-6 years. So I think it was a good choice, but I can't take any credit for it at all. In fact, I was against it.
Okay. So I know you are one of the co-founders. What made you want to kind of co-found and start an airline? You know, not only up in the Yukon, but just kind of in general.
Well, I didn't have any particular aspirations to do this. There was an opportunity. I think it would have been the summer of 1972 or 3, to get your private pilot's license for $750, and I thought, well, I've always been interested in airplanes and cars and machinery in general, so I thought, well, this is great, I'll do it. And after getting my private license, I found I enjoyed it sufficiently to work on my commercial license, and ended up buying an airplane, a 172 to log hours in, and happened to run into a local maintenance engineer because I needed to have somebody to work on my airplanes, and we cooked up this idea to maybe lease this 172 to the local charter operator, and the guy suggested, you know, that he was struggling financially. Why don't you guys buy me out? Well, we didn't have any money, but we suggested we could offer him $50,000 for his business subject to financing. He'll never say yes, and we'll never get the financing. Well, he said yes, and we got the financing. So that's
kind of how it happened.
That's how it happened. Yeah.
What would you say has been the hardest part about running an airline?
Oh, there's so many moving pieces. I think the complexity of it is a real challenge, and it's a very competitive business. As you know, margins are not that big, so I think it's a challenge every day, and you really got to stay on top of stuff. And it takes so many different people doing their jobs to have an airplane depart and arrive on time with the correct payload in it. You know, I mean, it's all challenging. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. And
what would be your favorite part, and the best thing about running an airline and being involved in Air North?
I just, me as an individual, I'm a numbers guy, so I enjoy the finance, managerial finance, and I enjoy the flying. So they're both favorites. I wouldn't want to be 100% doing one or the other. I think that for me, it's great to have a mix, to be able to operate a company the size where you are working with your peers. You know, you're not a nameless, faceless person that works in an executive office or something like that. It's all very hands-on.
What type ratings do you currently have? I know I've seen pictures of you in the 737. Do you also have a type rating for the ATR as well?
No, not the ATR. So the types we operate now, it's just the Boeing. But over the years, DC-3, DC-4, HS-748.
Right. And then being type rated in the NG, does that also qualify you for the 4 and 500 as well?
Yes.
They do.
All of the Boeing pilots are qualified on the classics and the NGs.
Okay. How is being a pilot giving you kind of a unique perspective about running an airline? There are a lot of CEOs out there for airlines, but not many of them are also pilots at their own airline. How does that kind of give you that unique perspective that they don't have?
Well, I think an understanding of flight ops and maintenance is important. I'm not a maintenance engineer, but I understand maintenance, and I think that having operational skills is useful. But you have to have the marketing and finance skills as well. I'm not a strong marketer, but I do have some skills in finance and operations. That those would be my two strengths, I guess.
All right. Behind the scenes, how has running an airline played an important part in your life since you started it in the 70s?
Well, I think it's important to enjoy going to work, to enjoy your job, and I get enjoyment out of this.
Yeah. Air travel is important for the movement of people, cargo, in, out, and kind of within the Yukon. I know you briefly talked about this kind of already. How are you partnering with the territorial government on your flights to the regional destinations like Nuvik, Old Crow, and Dawson?
Well, we're not partnering with the government really for any part of our operation, but they are substantial purchasers of our product. During COVID, they were tremendously helpful in recognizing that the service we perform is essential, both within the territory and from the territory to southern destinations. And we took advantage of the wage subsidy program that was available to everybody, but territories also had essential air service support, because the first thing we did during COVID was cut back our schedule to one that made sense, and the first people we heard from was the hospital and the government saying, we need passengers and goods to travel more frequently. So we put in an expanded schedule that met the needs of the market, and the government was able to provide some significant financial assistance to get us through that period.
Now that we're kind of out of that period, we're after COVID and kind of even before COVID, is there any kind of subsidy that you guys receive to serve those small small regional destinations, kind of like the U.S. has their essential air service programs? Are there any government subsidies at all for those flights?
No, we don't have an essential air services program in Canada, as you know, and there are no subsidies for the flights. What we do is we generally operate the regional routes as milk runs, so there are 4 or 5 sectors and a combination of passengers and cargo. And we like to think that and certainly the statistics bear out that the cost of flying in regional Yukon is significantly less than the cost of flying in the other 2 territories. I mean, we have a lower cost environment, we've got a better highway network and all that sort of thing, so there's reasons for it. But it also compares very well with the cost of regional flying in similar or southern jurisdictions. I think the key to that has been the sharing of overhead expenses and the fact that we've made Whitehorse the hub. And our jet service, for example, looks after over half of our daily overhead costs. Charter flying looks after a portion. Our fuel sales division looks after our portion. And our regional skeds look after a portion. And you put them all together, and it provides an opportunity for us to provide affordable products in everything that we do: charter flying, jet flying, regional sked flying, and even fuel sales. The fuel arm of our company, we learned very early in the game that we needed to take control of our fuel supply chain, which starts off in the Pacific Northwest, either northwestern Washington or southwestern BC, barged up to Haines, Alaska, and trucked here to Whitehorse. And so we have a fleet of trucks and jet fuel and home heating fuel are the same product. They can be rebranded coming across the border, so you can rebrand the jet fuel to home heating fuel, which we do regularly. We have about 1,000 home heating fuel customers here in Whitehorse. It keeps up our purchase volumes and hence keeps our price low.
So you kind of prop up different parts of the company with other parts that make a little bit more money to keep the prices low.
A bit of a local diversification strategy. The other check on our pricing is the fact that our shareholders are our customers, and I know that if I were to, we have our AGM in one of the hangars, it's next week for that matter, and we typically have 10% of our shareholders turn up, and my guess is General Motors probably doesn't have 10% of their shareholders show up for an AGM, and I know that if I were to tell them that last year we achieved a 15% return on sales, which we didn't, the first thing somebody would do is say, well, you're charging us too much. So we have a check in place. We have to balance the needs of our customers and our shareholders, and that's probably a bit of a key to success for us, because it forces us to not take advantage of opportunities for a quick buck. We have to play the long game, and the best example of that is short notice travel. You'll often see the competitors, if you're buying your ticket, a month out and the flights are relatively empty, their fares are down, our fares are down. But when you get within 2 or 3 days, their fares are 3 or 4 times what they were. We couldn't do that. It's a small town. I'd be getting calls at home. So, we have to have a more balanced pricing structure, so that people are not having to pay exorbitant fares, if they have an illness in the family and they need to go jump on the jet tomorrow to go to Vancouver or something. And I think that over the years is paying dividends for us, because people know that they're always going to get a good product at a fair price. And we don't profess to be an ultra low cost airline. I don't think there is such a thing in Canada, because we're not an ultra low cost environment, but we do try to provide a fair product at a fair price. We try to, recognizing that in recent years there's been some significant irritation points for passengers, canceled flights, having to pay for your checked baggage, having to pay for every little thing that you want, pay for the food on board. We've tried to stay away from the irritation points, so we do feed you on our flights. You get 2 free pieces of checked baggage, and we do our damnedest to not cancel flights. We do our best to, even if we're delayed, deliver passengers to their destination as close as possible to their scheduled time. And we have to deal with weather situations up here on our north route in particular. The first stop is doesn't have a precision approach and is prone to getting fogged in. So you end up sitting and waiting for the fog to lift, and that delays the whole sked. But at least we get people moved generally same day, and same thing on the jet routes. And I think the big guys, the network carriers, sometimes find it easier just to cancel a flight to relieve the pressure. We try to avoid that, and one of our pet peeves with the regulators, ongoing dialogue, is they keep trying to take away the tools that we need to do the job. Shortening up on the number of hours we can fly in a day. The APPRs, the passenger protection rules, that really make it easier or less costly for the airline to just cancel a flight rather than to take a big delay. Well, that's kind of counterproductive, because one of the things that triggered the APPRs was stories of people getting stuck in airports, sleeping in airports overnight. And in today's aviation world, with airlines flying around 80% full with very, very expensive airplanes, those airplanes got to fly all day every day. And if they're full and all of a sudden you have a big weather delay or an air traffic control delay, if you cancel a flight, it's going to take you days to recover, weeks to recover perhaps. So you got to have a way of keeping the system moving. And as an airline, we get that. I'm not sure that the regulators get it. I'm not sure that ATC gets it. They just, if the traffic exceeds a certain volume, they just pull the circuit breaker and everything comes to a stop. Well, that isn't in the best interest of customers. And I think that all of us involved in the aviation supply chain have to recognize that the importance of keeping the system moving. You can't just stop it unless you absolutely have to.
All right. I know you're expanding a little bit into Toronto, or increasing flights a little bit into these places. You just had your first nonstop from here to Toronto. Are you looking at expanding your airline partnerships or airlines further than you already have?
Oh, interlines are a key to growth for us, and it's been a real struggle getting meaningful interline agreements with different carriers, but we're making some progress. We have a full interline with WestJet. We interline bags with Air Canada. We'd like to have a full interline with them as well. We've got an interline with Alaska Airlines. We've got one with Condor Airlines, one with recently with China Airlines. So I think that that's the way to grow. And if you look at the world aviation dynamics, between WestJet and Air Canada, I think they got 150 interline agreements with. They can't possibly fly everywhere in the world, and they couldn't. They'd be restricted by bilaterals even if they wanted to. So they've chosen to grow through interline and codeshare agreements. And we're doing the same thing in our little market, which is a bit of a microcosm of Canada if you think of it that way. Mm-hmm. Our best opportunities to grow our reach is through interline agreements, and that's certainly a focus for us.
Are there any interlines you're looking or that you're hoping to get in the near future?
There are, but I'm not the guy to share. I simply don't know. The commercial development guys, Ben would have been the guy to talk to answer that question. Okay. We're talking to different airlines all the time, and I think that the more seamless we can make travel for Yukoners and for people coming to visit the Yukon, the better off the territory is, and the more successful we can be. And if we can broaden our reach without having to fly a lot more, that's advantageous too.
Okay. Air North, I know you mentioned you're entering your 48th year. Congrats for that, first off. What is the company kind of doing to position itself for the future going forward? It's 50th anniversary and, even beyond that.
We're developing a group of bright, young managers and supervisors to, take us to the next level. I think our Indigenous partnership has been huge for us, that 2001, and I think that the growth of the airline, the more we can become, the more local ownership we can have, and I think we need to engage other First Nations in the Yukon. I think we need to engage other Yukoners. I think we've probably proven that, you know, we are a valuable piece of Yukon infrastructure. And, you know, if you look at, before we got into the jet business, you know, or since we've got into the jet business, air travel costs are half to a third of what they were, and the market's tripled or quadrupled. And more people can afford to fly, people can afford to fly more often. It helps develop our economy, and it makes the Yukon a better place to live and work. So it's an absolute win-win situation for everybody, not people that are directly involved with aviation, but people that just live here, and people that are doing business with people that come here, or that rely on people to come here for their businesses.
If there was one thing that you could change that you have, you know, done in the past, or, you know, one mistake you could correct or decision you could, you know, flip around, what would that be that has been made in the past 48 years of the airline?
There's too many dumb mistakes to list. But I can tell you, we have on some of our slideshows, I have a caption underneath a picture of an airplane that says "dumbest purchase ever," and that was a Fairchild Husky on floats, and it was the bean counter in me telling me that you could buy a Husky for $50,000, and a de Havilland single otter cost $175,000 at the time. The Husky will do almost everything the otter will do, so we bought a Husky. Dumb move.
All right. What does the company look like kind of going, you know, 2 years when you hit your 50th anniversary, you know, 5 years going past that? What's the airline going to look like going forward past
Well,
that?
I think, you know, continuous improvement is what we got to have. Not continuous growth necessarily, but continuous improvement. And I think that, you know, continuing to provide the Yukon market with safe and affordable air transportation is what's on the horizon for us.
Okay. And last question, one that I kind of ask everybody. If you had unlimited funds, no government restrictions, no oversight, what would you do with it, with the airline?
Well, I think we would modernize our fleet more quickly. You know, I think that's an easy one. Investing in additional assets so that we could improve our product. And you know, I think things like fleet modernization, construction of hangars. I mean, all these things have to happen over time. They can't happen overnight unless you do have unlimited funds. If you had unlimited funds, then or ready access to funds, you could take steps maybe a little bit quicker.
Yeah, thank you so much for answering my questions and taking the time out of your day to talk with me.
You're welcome.